Canon's cooking up a new firmware update for the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, while Nikon just dropped 2 new firmware updates, one for the Nikon Z6 Mark II and one for the Z7 Mark II. And I've also got an update for you on my own testing of the Canon EOS R5 Mark II with Canon's firmware 1.0.3. I'll walk you through everything step by step along with my conclusions. And if you are serious about staying ahead of the latest camera gear, hit that subscribe button. It not only helps this channel grow, but it keeps you in the loop, like a Six Flags roller coaster, fast, fun, and occasionally terrifying. Nikon just released a pair of firmware updates, one for the Nikon Z6 Mark II, not the Z6 Mark III, that's right, the Z6 Mark II, as well as the Z7 Mark II. Now in terms of the capabilities that the Z7 gets versus what the 6 gets, both cameras are getting the exact same firmware update, so only need to go through it once. The firmware update provides 3 main capabilities. Each camera now supports power zoom capabilities. The setup menu dash language, well, it's been added for Middle East localization. And the firmware updates also provide several fixes. So for example, when you move your focus point using Touch AF and shoot, it fixes the issue where you may not be able to shoot or the speed of continuous shooting might be reduced. The second issue that's fixed, when the monitor mode is set to Finder Priority 2, it fixes an issue where it might unintentionally transition from the playback screen to the shooting screen. And the second issue fixed with Finder Priority 2, the focus point may not be displayed when returning from the half-press timer off. And the last fix, when you connect to a wireless remote controller and perform a linkage release, the camera may not be able to shoot. Disappointed that this isn't a bigger fix adding more capabilities? Well, you really shouldn't be because, well, they're no longer the darlings in Nikon's eye. I mean, the Z6 Mark III replaces the Z6 Mark II, and the Z7, well, it's kind of up in the air, and one could say that the Nikon Z8 really does replace the Nikon Z7, although there are still a few rumors out there saying that we are getting some sort of replacement for the Z7 Mark II. Okay, now it's time to turn our attention to Canon and the firmware updates that we're expecting for the EOS R5 Mark II. So why don't we go ahead and first address the major firmware update that Craig told us about back in January. Canon will announce a major new firmware update for both the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and the Canon EOS R1. But for now, those are the only 2 cameras that were mentioned. And Craig goes on to say that we weren't privy to exactly what the features are coming in the firmware updates, but we were told that they were significant. And this, of course, is pretty exciting. Many of us remember the R5 Mark I. I own the R5 Mark I. I still do. And after those first 3 firmware updates, we started to get some major updates, like getting Canon Log 3, an improvement to the autofocus system. And that heat management system, well, we can now pretty well shoot continuously without any overheating, so long of course, that we set that auto temp power off to high. And of course do have to deal with that 30-minute record limit that Canon never removed. But still, when Canon Rumors says that we're getting a major firmware update, well, that leads us to believe we can get some pretty exciting capabilities. We got firmware 1.0.2 in December, but then on March the 18th, Canon released firmware 1.0.3. And as its namesake alludes to, it was a minor update. And while it fixed many minor issues, it also introduced some inconsistencies and reliability issues to the autofocus system, which I'll update in just a moment. In Canon Rumors post back in January, they did mention some of the rumored updates that could come in that major firmware update. And the most obvious to anybody, I know, Ryan, is 4K 60 fine. The camera, after all, can do 8K up to 60 frames per second, so if we downsample that, well, then we should be able to do 4K 60 fine. Oh, I get it. I get it. This could generate a little bit more heat. But, okay, so we have certain time limits. At least give us the option. Let us know how long can we record. Is it an hour, half an hour, 2 minutes? It's not going to be 2 minutes. But give us 4K 60 fine. And depending on if we have the heat grip and what shooting conditions we're in, well, we can get definitely longer record times. Now, some of you might be saying, yeah, that's great, Simon. Whoopee, 4K fine. Can Canon finally give us OpenGate? And that's one of the things that Canon rumors also mentioned, that the rumors are that this major firmware update will provide us with OpenGate. And that's kind of a big deal. There is one other capability that was mentioned in the Canon rumors post, and that's we'd get a new mode, an APS-C mode with an aspect ratio of 17:9 that would give us up to 120 frames per second raw. Yeah, that's interesting. Now this indicates that the camera will utilize an APS-C sized portion of the full frame sensor. And this is commonly used in cinematic productions. It gives us a wider field of view and is particularly beneficial for filmmakers looking for that cinematic look. But the rumored specs indicating that 120 frames per second RAW is also possible in this APS-C mode, well, that's a very high frame rate for recording RAW. And RAW up to 120 frames per second, well, it provides greater flexibility in post-production, allowing for high-quality slow motion effects and extensive color grading options. So you might be wondering, yeah, I know, Ryan, you might be wondering, as Ryan is, well, why on earth just give us OpenGate and then that solves all that problems, right? Well, it does, but you see, if you go full sensor, you're not going to get 120 frames per second. You're pretty well capped at just over 8K at up to 60 frames per second. And let's just assume that Canon could somehow allow it to do OpenGate up to 120 frames per second. Why would you not want to see that on the Canon EOS R5 Mark II in a firmware update? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Heat, data, and pain. Shooting at 120 frames per second OpenGate on a full frame sensor RAW would absolutely roast the camera, flood your CF Express card, and melt your editing machine. Canon actually delivering 4K up to 120 frames per second in an APS-C 17:9 aspect ratio actually does make an awful lot of sense and kind of avoids all those overheating issues. Now, that doesn't mean that we could potentially get OpenGate. It would just, you'd have more modes, and that's a good thing, right? We see this with Panasonic. One thing they do is offer us an awful lot of modes. Although above 4K, you're not getting 422, and the rolling shutter is quite high. But still, in terms of various different resolutions, refresh rates, Panasonic gives us an awful lot of options. But as I covered in detail in previous videos, Canon is dealing with many bugs and issues related to the R5 Mark II. Some related to battery performance, others related to autofocus, and then of course there's that myriad of other various issues, minor issues, that you get when you release a new product. And in terms of that major firmware update, I'm really not expecting that to come out until a lot of these other issues have been fixed. I've reached out to various Canon support centers with issues, and I've just kind of asked casually, is this a common issue? What are the big issues? And they all seem to agree that the most amount of calls that they get, the greatest amount of complaints, is related to various battery performance issues. Although, as you can see from the comment section, and as we see on various places within the internet, we are seeing an awful lot of issues related to the autofocus system. And that is our next story. I updated my Canon EOS R5 Mark II to firmware 1.0.3 back on March the 18th. But autofocus became a little bit bipolar, sometimes being fast and snappy and never losing focus. Other times, it failed to pull focus. I tried to focus close and afar, and no improvement. It stayed stubborn, locked, unwilling to move. I then pressed the shutter button. Again, no effect. Fully pressed the shutter button to try and get it to wake up and move around, and it failed. Sometimes it did take over a minute before the autofocus came back. And sometimes the R5 Mark II would also track a subject perfectly, but failed to pull focus. This was actually more annoying than the other problem because everything looked great on the LCD until I got home and noticed that it wasn't in focus. And in terms of the conditions in which this issue occurred, well, I covered that in previous videos, but let's sum things up, and then I'll give you my workarounds. So I was shooting with a Canon RF 100 to 500mm, and yes, it was up to the latest firmware update 1.1.0, which I think came out in 2021. I was out shooting in various environments. Now, each time it was sunny, and when I tried to reproduce the problem, I made sure it was always sunny. It was around 10 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 4 o'clock, but no later. And the ambient temperature was somewhere around, I guess I would say, the high 40s, so let's say 50 to 60 degrees, and closer to 60, but maybe not going over 60. And in terms of Celsius, I guess that would be somewhere around 8 to 13 degrees. It was strange because some of the times I would go out and it was just completely unreliable. Other times I had absolutely no issues whatsoever. So what was the difference between those different environments? Well, I found out that the issue didn't occur if I had the power saving capabilities turned off or disabled. So for example, if my camera didn't automatically go to sleep, guess what? I didn't have the problem. The problem only occurred after I woke up my camera from sleep. It was, I guess, akin to if you're you're a teenager at least once yourself, and if you've got teenagers, they like to sleep in, and if you try to wake them up before they've had their proper rest, they don't function very well. They get sometimes ill-tempered, sometimes they're snarky, sometimes they just, well, it's kind of like talking to a wall or talking to somebody who's on Mars. It might take 8 minutes to get a proper response. And that's kind of how the autofocus system felt. But if I disable that, so it wouldn't go to sleep, and I would just turn it off when I was finished recording, I didn't have any issues. Now, I'm also testing this with video, and every time I go out, I'm sticking to video. I'm trying to stick to those time frames to try and reproduce the problem. I went out recently. Now, the weather here has been absolutely terrible. Well, I enjoyed it, but rainy, cloudy, overcast, not the conditions I want to test in. So I only had one opportunity to go out there, and I didn't have any problems whatsoever. At this time, the temperature was quite a bit warmer. I would say somewhere between 60 and 75 degrees. And this is the footage. In fact, the autofocus really performed very, very well, as you can see in this clip. Notice how various grasses get in the way, block its eye, and yet the camera remains focused on it. So while it's possible to reproduce these issues, it's not consistent. It's not every time. I don't know if temperature has any play in this. We saw with the battery performance issues that if you're shooting between 4 and 7 degrees Celsius, which is around, I guess, 40 to 50 degrees, notice how that kind of correlates to the problems I was having in those same temperatures. I wonder if those environmental conditions could somehow impact the autofocus system. I don't know. It takes an awful lot of testing, and that's the problem I'm having. Right now, the weather is not conducive to me testing. I want to get out there. I want to get out with a camera, and the last time I went out there and I shot those various clips that I just showed you, there wasn't a lot of wildlife around, so that was my other problem. We're getting to that time where they're nesting and you don't have a lot of action, so it's harder to track, it's harder to reproduce the same conditions. But this issue was there because the times I went out, it was unbelievable. Whenever I woke it up, it wasn't performing properly. I'd either have to pull the battery or turn it on and off again. And sometimes I found out recently, if I had an issue, if I just moved the autofocus switch from where I was in autofocus to manual focus and back, it would help, snap it out of its, I don't know, comatose reality or wherever it was. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. I know Canon is working on this, and as I get updates to this, I provide it to Canon. They've asked me for some further feedback because testing in the field is different from testing it within a QA and QC environment. And that's what I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping I'm well enough to be able to walk again this weekend, and the weather's good enough that I can get out there and I can shoot and test it, because sometimes the autofocus system on the R5 II is incredibly snappy, works very, very well, and is astonishing, like in this clip here. I just can't believe I was waiting for it to lose focus, and it didn't. Not once. Despite many great blades of grass crossing over its eye. So I don't know what's going on. I know from working in technology in those fields that some issues that aren't reproducible, doing the same thing time and time again, can take an awful long time to fix. But here's what you can do. Don't just wait for a firmware update. Don't just wait for me to tell you information and test. If you're having an issue, do us all a favor. Call up Canon, log it as an issue. And if you feel like it's going to go nowhere and they give you a bunch of stuff to do that you've already done, that's fine. The main thing is they've logged it into their system. It's another data point. It's another issue related to that autofocus. It helps raise the priority of that issue. Because right now, as far as Canon's concerned, the biggest issue that they're dealing with is the battery issue. So the only way to raise priority on this to get it fixed, because I've seen several comments, come on Canon, fix this. Simon, where's an update to this? Have you heard anything? The best way to get this turned around quicker is for you to call in to talk about your issues with them. I know it's a pain, but it's going to help us get there a whole lot sooner. Thank you. Thank you for watching this video, for watching it to the very end. One thing I might ask you to take a look at, if you're one of the 1% of the 1% that likes to know what goes on behind the scenes of this channel, then I've got a new subscriber level for you. It's $9.99 a month. I produce new videos every week taking you behind the scenes. And a lot of those behind the scenes videos are based on what you want. And right now I'm looking at setting up a private live stream where us insiders can get together, talk, and it's not a normal live stream. You don't just watch me and listen to me. You become part of the expert guest panel. I can bring you in, we can talk, and if you like that format, guess what? The next live coverage, you can be part of the expert guest panel. It's a way to give you a taste of what it's like to actually be part of the channel instead of just watching behind the scenes. And if you've got any questions, send them to me, and that can be the next behind the scenes video. And for the rest of you, thank you so much for watching. I don't expect that you do join. It's just another option for the 1% of the 1% that wants to know more. And for those of you that are interested in supporting the channel in other ways, like you want to get great deals on gear, I've got a lot of links in the description down below. If you buy anything at Adorama, B&H, or Amazon.com using my links, I get anywhere from 2 to 5% back, and you get a discount. I get a commission back. It's the best of both worlds, and it's one way of supporting the channel without actually giving me anything. And personally, I think that's one of the best ways. I don't do Patreon. I want to provide you guys with value, be part of that value chain to help you get more out of your gear. I'm not here to be a drain on your resources. I think as an enterprise architect, one of the most fundamental things we can do is not only manage effective change, but also to be part of that value chain, to make sure that we're not just talking about the capabilities of what technology can deliver, but ensuring that the technology delivers on the value that we strategically and tactically want to see as part of our business. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Have yourself a great day, a great week, and we'll see you again soon.